Good Yontif, everybody. I'm going to tell a story in a moment, but before I tell the story, just keep this in mind for as we are launched into this most intense time of year. It's related to the story a bit, but it's just related to the whole idea of teshuvah, return, repentance, and so forth, and the awareness of ourselves that is so important, that is really critically indispensable for this time of year. Just think for yourselves as we launch the days of awe, whether you are under 10 or much older, what is one thing that you would like to let go of this year? One thing about yourself that you would like to let go of this year. Maybe it's, resentments or some sort of greed or something that is just inside you that feels like it's stuck inside you or hooked like a fish hook in the mouth of a fish, but you can unhook it, and you know that you need to unhook it, and it's just not good. It's not seemly, it's not pleasant, sometimes it's not moral, it's not kind, whatever it is. Just think of one thing that you might want to let go of or contemplate letting go of during this holiday season. And maybe it could be a recurring theme between now and when we blow that shofar on Nila. And now a story. Good Yontif, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. So there was a king, and this king had there was a princess, his daughter. She was a young woman, and they had a lovely, father-daughter, parent-child relationship. It was very, very nice. But the king did have the one thing that the king needed to let go of a little bit, or a lot, was that he got very impatient. Like he'd get angry and get impatient. That was his big thing. And so one evening, the princess and the king are chatting. Maybe there's some other people around, and they're talking about something, and the princess says something that the king disagrees with. It's not such an unusual thing. But the king disagreed vehemently, more and more adamantly, and he got angry at the princess. Now the princess could see this coming down because she'd seen this before. But the king just got so angry, he said to her something that he wished he had not said. He said, "You should go to a place of no good." Isn't that a strange thing to say? You should go to a place of no good. The princess was really startled by this, so she ran out and she ran to her room. And the next morning, when the sun arose and everyone was getting up, the princess was gone. And the king, of course, was distraught. He was beside himself. What have I done? He asked himself, and he asked God, and he asked his ministers too, and he had gathered his ministers around. And the ministers knew this princess, and since she was a little girl. Some of them even grew up with the princess, the younger ministers. And so one of those younger ministers said, "Listen, I will find your daughter, the princess. I will bring her home. I will return her to this palace." And the king said, "Please do." So the minister, this young man, packed a bag, and he starts walking all over the land. He goes all over the place, looking. He doesn't know where to look. He has no idea where she went. At one point, he goes down he sees a path that he hadn't tried before. He goes down this path, and he sees a castle in front of him. And he says, "Maybe, just maybe." So he walks on down that path, and he sees that the castle is guarded and everything else, but the guards just kind of let him right in. And he's walking around the castle, the palace, just looking around, and he hears noise coming from one room. He opens the door to the room, and it's the throne room. You know what a throne room is? It's a room of, what's the word? Thrones, that's right. It's a throne room, and there's a king on a throne. And next to the king is another throne, and it's empty. And there are all these people about. There are musicians and jesters and people that hang around palaces, and the minister's now in there. And he sort of goes to the side, to the corner, doesn't want to be noticed, but there are a lot of people around. And then a hush comes over the entire throne room. And the king, this is not the first king, this is a completely different king. The king on the throne says, "Behold, here arrives our new princess." And the doors open, and who do you think walks in? One guess. The first king's daughter, the princess, comes in, and she's coming in, and she's looking a little bewildered, but she's looking great. She's got nice clothes, nice pair of shoes. She looks like she's been eating well and everything else, and she sits down on that throne, and people are cheering and clapping, and music's swelling and everything else, and the princess is looking around, and she's smiling, and she looks okay, and then she looks in the crowd, and she sees the minister, this young minister, her father's minister. So she gets off of her throne, and she walks over to him, and she taps him on the shoulder, and she says, "Don't I know you?" And he says, "Yeah, you know me. I'm the minister. I'm the young minister from your father's minister." He says, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "My father banished me to a place of no good. This is that place." He said, "It doesn't look so bad, actually." And she said, "Well, it's not so bad. They're nice people, but this is not where I belong. And where do I want to be? Where do I need to be? I need to return. I need to return to my father's home, to my family, to my original home. I need to get back there." And he said, "Come on, let's go." And he thought it was going to be like an adventure kind of thing, where they're going to be running, and the knights were going to be chasing them and everything else. She said, "We can't, it's not that easy. What you have to do to bring me home is to go to a certain hill and stay on top of that hill for 1 year, praying the whole time for my return. And then on the last day of that year, you have to fast." Fasting meaning no eating or drinking, and you have to not fall asleep that entire day. And then you can come get me and I'll go home with you. He says, "Fine, I will do this for you, my princess." And so he goes to the top of that hill, and he's spent the entire year praying that she can be restored to her family. And the final day of that year comes. And what are the two things that he has to do or not do? No eating or drinking, no sleeping. Did I say that? No sleeping part? Right, no sleeping either. And so he's walking back to the castle. He's very psyched. He's going to bring the princess back to her father. He thinks it's going to be great to return her to home. And he's walking, he's on the path going to that castle, and he comes across this beautiful, he hadn't noticed before, this beautiful apple tree. Have you ever seen like this most beautiful apple tree? Have you ever just been seeing an apple tree and just say, "Behold, that is an apple tree"? So he sees it and he says, "I'm just going to take a closer look at these apples." So he goes up to the tree. Those are gorgeous apples. And he said, "You know, they smell good too. I'm just going to take a whiff of the apple." And now he's like this close to the apple. And what does he do next? Any guesses? He takes a bite of the apple, right? And the apple is so delicious and so nutritious. And he's so delirious with joy at having eaten this apple, but it has something in it that makes him just kind of like conk out immediately. He falls asleep right at the foot of the tree. So the day passes. The princess notices that he has not come. She's very upset. She gets on her horse and she starts looking for this minister, and she passes by this apple tree and she sees a guy just sleeping by the apple tree, and she wakes him up and he says, What day is it? What happened?" And she said, "You left me. The day came and went, and you didn't come get me." He said, "Oh my God, I fell asleep and I ate. I'm so sorry. Let's go now." She said, "It's not that easy. You got to do it all over again. You've got to go back to the top of that hill, and you got to pray for a full year that I can be restored, returned to my family, to my father, the king. But this time, I know fasting is hard. This time, on the last day, just don't fall asleep." So, does the same thing. He goes to the top of that hill, spends the whole year praying and praying that she can come back with him, that she can be returned, and that last day finally comes, and he can eat and drink, but he just can't fall asleep. And he's going back along that path, and he sees something he had not noticed before. And it was a stream. Okay, big deal, a stream. But it was not your average stream. He's like, "That's not a regular stream. That stream is flowing, not with water, but with burgundy wine. Imagine that. Hast thou ever seen a stream flowing with burgundy wine? I guess not. But this is what he saw. He said, well, I'm allowed to eat and drink. I just can't fall asleep. So he goes down, crouches down, and he just takes one sip of the burgundy wine stream. And what happens? He falls asleep. And now he sleeps for a long time. He's sleeping and sleeping. The princess obviously knows that he has not arrived, but days go by. And she's scouring this countryside looking for him. His beard is growing bigger and bigger because it's been days, he's sleeping for days, he's sleeping for weeks. She finally passes this strange stream and sees this human being lying there. And she goes up to him and she shakes him, and he doesn't wake up. And she shakes him again, doesn't wake up. Slaps him, doesn't wake up. Splashes wine on his face, doesn't wake up. So she starts crying. She takes her handkerchief and she starts crying and weeping and crying. And she takes her tears as they're falling into the handkerchief, and she spells out with her tears the message for the minister, that young man who's sleeping there. And she puts that handkerchief in his hand and she departs. A while later, maybe a long time later, the minister awakes and he's so tired. He's like, what am I doing with this big beard? And what is this handkerchief doing here? And he holds it up to the sun, and he sees that there's a message from the queen. And the message says the following. He reads it. Dear minister, stop. Like a telegram. This is the princess. Stop. What happened? Stop. I now live somewhere else. Stop. Come find me. Stop. Sincerely, the princess. Stop. P.S. Don't delay. So the minister goes around looking for the princess. He looks all over the place. He goes over hill and vale. He goes through deserts, and he goes over mountains, and he skydives to try to find her. He's in the tundra, looks all over for her, and then he's in this forest, and he sees a giant. Not just any giant, but a giant that's so big that he's carrying a tree. Not like a bonsai tree, but he's carrying like a whole bur oak, like this big, that big. That's how big he is. And he says, hello, giant. And the giant says, hello, little human being. And he says, have you seen the princess? The giant says, I've not seen the princess, but I can summon all the winds from throughout this entire world. And one of those winds must have seen the princess. So all the winds come. Imagine like all the winds coming at one time. Sirocco's and what are other kinds of winds? Nor'easters and other ones. And they all come around, and none of them have seen the princess, except finally this one other wind comes in. It's the wind with no direction. And that wind of no direction says, yes, I know exactly where the princess is. And the minister says, well, tell me where and I will go find her. The wind said, you'll never find her yourself. So what does the wind do? Any guesses? Just picks him up, picks up the minister, and the minister is just floating with the wind, and they come to this castle, a different castle in a different place, and it's humongous. And the wind does not stop at the door, but goes right to a window and enters that window, and in the room is the princess. And the wind just lays the minister down right by the princess. And the princess doesn't recognize him because he looks like such a wreck. But finally she recognizes him, and she says, you found me. And he says, what do I have to do now to bring you home? And she says, you have done everything you possibly could. Now take me home. And so what happens at that point? The wind swirls around, picks them both up, and returns both of them, after a nice long journey, to the princess's home. Goes right into a window, sees where the king is, sitting down eating, looking a little sad, and lays both of them right there before the king. And can you imagine how the king felt? He smiled, he wept, and he said, you have returned to me, my princess. And the princess said, I have returned to you, my father. And they lived happily ever after. P.S. What do you think the P.S. is? Right. Who said that? Arby? Carla? What? They married. The minister shaved, and he and the princess married, and they lived happily ever after in their returned spots. Again, friends, the word of the season is return, repentance, and the Hebrew word being teshuvah. And the princess just wanted to do teshuvah back to her father. The father wanted to do teshuvah, repentance, to bring the princess back to him. And that is our goal for this season. Again, it's not about, there's lots of other things going on, a lot of words, a lot of music, sermons, socializing and stuff like that. Ultimately, primarily, it's to return our best selves back to ourselves so that this season might be a season of teshuvah and great meaning. Good Yontif and Shabbat Shalom.